These items may seem foreign to the average Midwesterner, but for a large portion of the St. Louis community, they resonate a little deeper. The newly opened Center for Bosnian Studies at Fontbonne University houses books, artifacts, images, all to better commemorate the nearly 70,000 people in the Bosnian community who now call St. Louis their home.
We interact in St. Louis every single day with members of the Bosnian community, and all of them have stories to tell.
Dozens of people gathered for the official opening of the center on March 1st, which was also the 30th anniversary of Bosnia's independence. And while the center itself is no bigger than the average conference room, the history it holds is vast and, perhaps more importantly, greatly reflected throughout our city.
The way I became involved was by meeting people from Bosnia in St. Louis who had migrated here after the war and the genocide. And I realized that there was just this really interesting population that was becoming part of St. Louis. And that was
Dr. Ben Moore is the senior researcher at the Center for Bosnian Studies. But for the past 15 years, Ben has been working to preserve the history through his founding of the Bosnian Memory Project, which is really how the center came to be.
We recorded, along with our students who were participating in the process, our first interview of a Bosnian genocide survivor. And it was just a really moving experience. That led to more interviews. We had, with the help of our friend Amir Karadzic and Patrick McCarthy, an exhibit at the St. Louis Holocaust Museum and Learning Center in 2007 that focused on the survivors from the Bosnian city of Prijedor. And then that exhibit traveled around the United States. And I really credit that exhibit with galvanizing our interest and leading to more oral histories and more collections. And that exhibit was really the beginning of the Bosnian Memory Project.
Bosnia and Herzegovina, what is commonly referred to simply as Bosnia, is a country of about 3.8 million people in Southeast Europe. As a former republic of Yugoslavia, the country's history is complex. There was an extensive timeline of events that led to the Bosnian War, which took place between 1992 and 1995. We won't go into all of the political details, but essentially the war was deeply rooted in multi-ethnic tension between Bosnian Muslims, Serbs, Croats, and the Yugoslav army.
It was, a genocidal war, so there was war and there was ethnic cleansing, and this led to so many people being expelled from their homeland. And they came to St. Louis the first migrants came in 1993, really directly from some of the worst visited places in Bosnia-Herzegovina.
After the initial wave of refugees came in 1993, there was a second wave that relocated to St. Louis after the war had ended in the late 1990s. Shortly after that, a third wave of immigration happened when refugees who had relocated to parts of Europe were told to go back home to Bosnia because the war had ended.
Problem with that was they didn't have a place to go back to. Not only were their homes destroyed, but many of the perpetrators were now in positions of civil power and political power. Another factor that's really contributed to the growth of the community is secondary migration from other parts of the United States, because Bosnians generally have come to view St. Louis as a good place to live, in part because there's so many Bosnians here. I mean, it's one of those things that generates itself.
When Bosnian refugees first came to St. Louis, they began settling in the Bevo Mill area, slowly starting to rebuild their lives by renovating houses and starting businesses. Many families have since moved towards South County, but you'll still find plenty of Bosnian ties, like bakeries, restaurants, and of course, this replica of the Sable in Sarajevo. This upward mobility for the community, however, came with its fair share of obstacles. Behedin Piric was an intern with the Center for Bosnian Studies, where he himself recorded an oral history of his experience as a refugee.
I had started school in Bosnia, came to the United States, and I was put in the first grade, and then I really didn't learn anything. I didn't know English.
Behedin's oral history depicts his struggles of adjusting to the American school system and the loss of community he and other Bosnian refugees felt. And although he was old enough to have some memories of living in Bosnia, it was not like his parents' experience, which is why the oral histories collected by the center is so meaningful for younger generations and those to come.
My dad came to the United States with his legs were shattered because he had stepped on a mine in Bosnia. Just shrapnel everywhere in his body. He was close to death. My mom, there was really no food or anything like that, so she would go and look for food anywhere she could, if that meant going into places that had been abandoned, whole villages where the army had come through and killed everyone, just to find like a scrap of bread or whatever. Or another big thing that was quite dangerous for her and for all the people of Bosnia, the United Nations and the United States. They would drop food from big transport planes, but whole pallets of food. So these pallets of food would fall and there'd be a parachute. And it'd be in the middle of the night. They do it in the middle of the night because they do it during the day. The soldiers that are surrounding the city would just kill everyone there that's trying to get the food. And a real big threat with these huge pallets, you know how big a pallet is, they would crush people. You would be trying to, looking up, trying to get there, and it would just, crush people.
Watching now what is happening in Ukraine, seeing the refugees leaving their homes, innocent people, it brings back so many memories for the Bosnian population in St. Louis. It's, again, a situation of an innocent people being the victim, civilians being the victim of another nation for its belligerence and just pure aggression.
Knjiga Fotografija, which means the book of photographs, but it's more widely known as the book of belongings because of what the photographs represent. It was intended to enable the identification of remains that were found in mass graves in eastern Bosnia, people who were victims of the war and the genocide.
The center has one of only 4 copies of the Book of Belongings, and while its contents are sometimes too painful for Bosnians, it's another important layer of preserving that part in history. The center also spreads that preservation by working with researchers from around the world, hosting community events, and even working with local high schools to incorporate that history into classrooms.
Who are we and why are we here?
We learned a lot, or I learned a lot in the United States school system about, genocide and the Holocaust and all these horrible things that happened. But then I would always kind of look what happened to me. And the Center for Bosnian Studies, what they're trying to do is trying to put that into the narrative, the Bosnian story.
Because of the way that, and the reasons behind the Bosnians coming to St. Louis being really narratives of hate and discrimination, the center also has this larger purpose of educating people about why it's important to counter those narratives, what they can result in.
For Living St. Louis, I'm Brooke Butler.